Sports governance. Sports awareness. Sports accessibility. Sports facilities development. Sports linkages. Institutionalization of the Philippine Sports Institute. Legislative initiatives and interagency collaborations. Bahagi na ng buhay nating mga Pilipino ang sports. Mula sa panahon ng unos, sa tamis ng tagumpay, sa kabila ng pagbabago ng buhay, ang Philippine Sports Commission ay patuloy na magigilingkod sa sambayanan at atletang Pilipino.
Good day to everyone. Welcome to Make It Sports. This is Attorney Al Agra, your sports law for all friend. For this topic, we will cover the field of play. What are the duties and obligations of an organizer? And what are the risks that are assumed and not assumed by athletes? Here's a checklist, a general checklist of the requirements for a particular event in a field of play. It talks about the organizer, who's the one organizing, its track record, recognition, and permits. What is the event? Is it recreational or competitive? Is it standalone or is it part of a series? Is the event team or individual? Is it sanctioned by government or by a national sports association? Field of play or the course? What are the standards, the specifications? Would the audience be allowed? What are the barriers, course warning, and reminders? Another important aspect of organizing an event will be the officials, the referees, the director, the marshals, the secretariat, the timing, the awarding, and registration. Important would be medical team, the team itself, ambulance, aid station, food, and even hydration. By participating in an event, are they given uniforms, bibs? Is there a prize money, medals, shirts, and other freebies? And lastly, what are the requirements? How much should an entry fee be? Is there a refund policy? And the data privacy, and even the waivers which are executed by the athletes, the participating athletes. First, let's talk about the organizer. Typically, the organizer is a stock corporation, although it can, of course, there's no prohibition for a non-profit, non-stock corporation to organize events. And in terms of the corporate, the legal vehicle, it can be a corporation. Under the revised corporation code, it can be a one-person corporation. It can be a partnership or even a sole proprietorship. But if it's a stock corporation under the revised corporation code, of course, like any other person, there must be a name. What are the primary purposes and secondary purposes of that entity? So the primary purpose could be organizing events. Under the current, the revised corporation code, it can be one person or a maximum of 15 incorporators. The life of the organization or the corporation can be perpetual or a fixed term. No minimum capital stock is required under the current law. And before you can be a corporation, your articles and bylaws must be approved by the Securities and Exchange Commission. Sanctioning of events. Is it sanctioned by government? Then you have to get the approvals from government. Is it sanctioned by the National Sports Association? Depending on the sport, then you have to approach that National Sports Association. Can you organize an event without the sanction? Then it will depend on government and the National Sports Association. If sanctioned, what are the fees and the terms of the sanction? What will be the scope of the sanction? Is it just one event or a series of events? Assuming there's any accident, what will be the liabilities of the organizer or even the sanctioning agency? Of course, important for any sanction would be compliance with the safety rules, with the technical rules, and depending on the sanctioning body will be compliance and of anti-doping regulations and even random testing. The sanctioning agency will send a representative as observer. And lastly, if sanctioned, will the results of that particular event, will it be part of, let's say, the national ranking that will qualify the athlete to, let's say, international competitions? So this will be the important elements when an event is sanctioned or not. Permitting of events. All events must secure the necessary permits from the local government unit. the city mayor or the municipal mayor, in compliance with the local law or the national law, a mayor has the option to issue a license and issue a permit. It also has the option to suspend or revoke that permit. But to guard against any whimsical or arbitrary non-issuance or revocation, the mayor must follow its ordinance or if there's a relevant national law. Can a permit be revoked? Yes, because these are privileges. But of course, the revocation must not be whimsical and capricious. And before a permit is revoked, there must be due process, meaning the organizer must be notified and the organizer must be given the opportunity to explain itself before revocation. And that's clear under the 1991 Local Government Code. Another important aspect of the field of play and organizing events will be the contracts. If you look at this infographic, there are at least 6 types of contracts between an organizer and another party. Organizer and, let's say, the National Sports Association, organizer and the athlete, organizer and the owner of the venue, organizer and, let's say, the supplier of medals, organizer and, let's say, the sponsors. You have a presenter, you have a major sponsor or a minor sponsor. And lastly, the agreement between the organizer and the staff and its officials. So it is also important to know that there are 3 elements to a contract: the consent of both parties. How is that manifested in an organizer-athlete agreement? There's an invitation and the athlete registers. What is the object of that contract? Organizing the event and joining the event. And lastly, what will be the cost of the obligation or the consideration? On the part of the organizer, having a successful event, earnings, because if it's a profit entity, and on the part of the athlete, it will be training, winning, maybe getting a prize money, and of course, the athlete or the team must pay an entry fee in order to join the event organized by the organizer. And if there's any breach or violation of the contract, there are 7 options by which the breach can be remedied. Let's say failure to give the prize money when there's a promise to give one, then there could be specific performance being given the prize money. Substitute performance, let's say product exchange. One product is no longer available, then there could be a substitution of the product. Equivalent performance or damages when there's negligence, and we will explain that shortly. The contract can be canceled. Let's say there's an agreement between the national athlete and the National Sports Association, and there's breach or violation of the agreement, then there could be a cancellation or suspension of the agreement, extension if there's a due to weather, injunction like an organizer cannot use the logos or brands of another organizer because these are proprietary. And lastly, giving penalties such as, let's say, if there's a physical injury, then there would be a corresponding penalty on the part of the offender. Important in any event, in any sport, will be compliance with the rules. It is important in order for rules to be followed, the rules must be published. It must be made known not just to the athletes, but even the officials. There must be strict compliance with the rules because rules are there to ensure fair play and consistency, because without the rules, this will lead to anarchy and chaos. Consistency all throughout the event. The rules cannot be changed while you're already playing the event, playing the sport. Equality in sports, important in rules of the sport, would be respect for decisions. And equally important would be the protection of the athletes. Hence, in any sport, rules of the sport, there must be embedded in the rules of the sport the safety rules. Let me propound a question. And by the way, the answer to this is actually been decided by our Supreme Court in 2017. So let me read the problem. Is an event organizer of a marathon liable for the death of an athlete who was hit by a jeepney in the section of the course? In this particular case, what was the defense of the organizer? Of course, the organizer was saying, I am not liable. The organizer is not liable, citing three defenses. One, the athlete signed a waiver, which includes death. Number two, we've undertaken previous events and there was no untoward incident. And lastly, I am not at fault. The one who is at fault is the jeepney driver. What was the ruling of the Supreme Court in this case? In this case, according to the Supreme Court, the organizer was negligent. And therefore, the organizer is liable to the athlete who happens to be a minor. Why? Why is the organizer liable if there was a waiver? In previous events, there was no untoward incident, and it was the jeepney driver who caused the death of the athlete. The organizer is liable because one, there was no roadblock. Number two, the staff, the marshals were not properly trained. There was no proper coordination of the marshals. There was lack of due diligence on the part of the organizer. And the fact that there was a jeepney driver who actually caused the injury, that does not break the connection between the obligation, the duty of the organizer with the injury sustained by the athlete. Naging pabaya ang organizer. Hindi niya ginawa ang kanyang mga katungkulan as an organizer. What are the learnings in this case? In order for an organizer to be liable, there must be damage, there must be proof of the damage, and you're able to connect the negligence with the injury or the damage. According to the Supreme Court, the marathoner, the athlete, did not foresee that he or she will die by racing, by joining the marathon. Death is not a normal or known risk. Okay? The organizer must adopt adequate measures for the safety of the athletes, the participants, and the fact that there was an intervening negligence of a jeepney driver does not render the organizer is still liable because of the negligence of the organizer. The negligence of the organizer, marshals, no roadblocks, no due diligence, was in fact the proximate cause. Because if the organizer was diligent, then walang aksidente. Okay? So again, it is important for organizers to be responsible for the course, for the personnel, for the safety of all the athletes. So here, even if there's a waiver, which includes death, that does not mean that the athlete can no longer claim damages from the organizer because the organizer was at fault. It was negligent. The negligence of the organizer was the proximate cause for the death of that athlete. Important in any event will be the staff and the referees and the marshals. While the referees, in this case, the referee of a basketball event has the freedom to determine, to call whether, let's say, there's a foul. The authority, and you cannot bring the referee, let's say, to court to question a foul called by the referee. The exception would be the referee must be trained, must be supervised, must have the freedom. You can still file a complaint, but not before the courts. The rules must be published. There must be time check. However, the referee can still be liable and the organizer can be liable for command responsibility for arbitrary and brazen violations, kapabayaan, malalim na paglabag ng referee sa mga panuntunan. No? So again, referee will not be liable except for arbitrary and brazen violations of the rules of the sport. What are the risks that are assumed by the athlete? The risks that are assumed must be obvious and foreseeable. So if another athlete conducts, let's say in a marathon or in a basketball, conducts himself or herself in an unexpected or unsportsperson-like manner, then the other athlete will be held liable because an athlete will only assume obvious, known, and appreciated dangers and risks. So unexpected and unsportsperson-like manner, these are not expected because an athlete will expect sportsperson-like conduct on the part of other athletes. And all athletes are expected to exemplify sportspersonship. And in my draft agreement between national sports associations and national athletes, here is my definition of being a sports person. Respect for equipment, for opponents, for officials, for employees, and the public. Practice safe sport. No to bullying. No to harassment. No to discrimination. No to abuse. Good manners, mature conduct, no abusive language, no cheating in elections, no cheating in competitions, no cheating through use of illegal drugs, and being responsible for others and helping build better humans and active communities, because athletes are social persons. What is the responsibility of one athlete towards another athlete? No untoward, no unsportsperson, no violation of the safety rules. It is the legal duty of an athlete to play the sport fairly, follow the rules on safety, no reckless misconduct. An athlete must know the rules, follow the rules, must be a sports person, and act responsibly. And if an athlete will deliberately, willfully violate a rule or conduct himself or herself recklessly, then the athlete will be held liable. And the athlete can even be held liable for physical injuries. In their case, promulgated by the Supreme Court last year, physical injury is not enough to be held liable and be penalized under the revised penal code. There must be intention. Intention to incapacitate and deprive another of certain bodily functions. So the commission of an act does not by itself make a man or a person guilty unless he or she intends harm to that other person. Harm and intent to harm. Data privacy. Every time we register for a particular event, we are asked personal information about ourselves. 1, we must consent. 2, it is asked of us fairly and lawfully. And there must be proportionality in terms of the information which are asked of the athletes. And it must be necessary in order for the proper conduct of the event. Name, birthday, contact numbers, home address may not be, it depends whether, let's say, the organizers will send you certain freebies, then maybe a home address or an office address may be sought, but not in all cases. Email address so that you'll be given, let's say, a certificate or they can communicate with you. Employer may not be relevant for a particular event. Emergency contact may be relevant. Medical condition, again, you represent yourself to be fit. Religion may not be important in most events, but let's say if the event organizer will provide for, let's say, certain types of food, then religion might be important. Educational attainment and profession may not be relevant. It may not be proportional and necessary. So the answer to whether what the information sought is proportional and necessary will depend largely on the event. Waiver. It is important to have a waiver, to execute a waiver as to what are the risks, death and injuries. Okay, are you also waiving your right over, let's say, photos and videos that can be used by the organizer? In waivers, you do not just waive certain rights, but you also represent that you're physically fit to join an event. And of course, before you can join the event, you must agree. So again, waiver is important, but again, let me underscore this. Even if you waive, let's say, injuries, you will tell the world that you will not file a case against the organizer, again, for only obvious and unknown risks. But for death, the organizer will still be held liable if the organizer was negligent. If the negligence of the organizer is the proximate cause of the injury or death. Insurance, while not all organizers provide for insurance, this may be a good practice of organizers, providing for insurance, and hopefully it will, if ever the organizer will prevent for insurance, then they can factor in, let's say, the premium in the entry fee. The coverage will be dependent on the insurance agreement. What type of insurance is being covered? Accident, health, personal accident. Again, it depends on the insurance because an insurance is also an agreement. Anti-doping. Why is this important? Because anti-doping ensures equality and fairness in competitions and safety as well. And according to the FINADO, which is the Philippine National Anti-Doping Organization here in the Philippines, which is attached to the Philippine Sports Commission, it provides for the principle of strict liability. The athlete, and only the athlete, is responsible for what goes into his or her body. Anti-doping may be prescribed if it's sanctioned, let's say, by the National Sports Association or by the Philippine Sports Commission. And you cannot be sanctioned or your event recognized if you do not comply with anti-doping and providing for the manner by which random sampling is taken. It is also important that all sports activities and all sports events are safe. We have this anti-gender-based harassment law or the Bawal Bastos law. According to this law, all public spaces, including sports events, fields of play, must be safe. They must be safe spaces. And an offender, violators of the Safe Space Act would be anyone that can be held liable for misogynistic, transphobic, homophobic, and sexist remarks and slurs in public spaces and even in cyberspace. Basically, what is this law all about? Respect. Respect for others. And this primer, which I published last year, enumerates the types of public spaces, and I believe that fields of play, sporting events, and facilities are all public spaces. So all these spaces, all our events must be safe. I also like to encourage all organizers, all facilities, all gyms, all training centers. They must be all organizers, owners of these facilities must adopt their safe sport policy. And safe sport is to promote the welfare and development of athletes to ensure their safety against any form of harassment, discrimination, abuse, violence, or bullying in sports. Whether this takes the form of physical, emotional, psychological, or gender-based. Whether in person or online. Based on race, ability, religion, poverty, status, position, education, ethnic background, opinion, and differences shall be guaranteed at all times, anywhere, by everyone, with anyone. Women in sports, under RA 9710, the Magna Carta for Women, it promotes gender representation, gender equality, promotes inclusivity, diversity, equal access by women and girls, affirmative action in sports, parity in awards. The award, the prize for a female athlete or a male athlete must be the same for the male and female. If they join, the male and female will join the same sports category, and you have a male division and a female division. The rewards must be the same. And of course, whether male or female, the well-being of the athletes must be promoted, and even the coaches and officials. Intellectual property is another important aspect in fields of play. The property of one cannot be used by another without the consent of the former, because these are properties. Another person using another property would amount to thievery if without the consent. So, and again, injunctive relief can be availed of when another one uses the property of another. In terms of patents, let's say sporting equipment, branding, let's say of a company, or let's say of a shirt, design rights, copyrights, and trade secrets. So it is important that this is part of respect. You respect the property of others as you want others to respect your own property, whether real property, personal property, or intellectual property. If there are disputes in any event, we discourage going to courts. Let's avail of what we call alternative dispute resolution mechanisms, conciliation, mediation, and if you want another entity, another person, or even a panel to resolve the controversy on your behalf, then both parties must agree to arbitration. Either it's embedded in your contract, or after the dispute, both parties will agree to bring it before arbitration. So this ends our discussion on the field of play, the obligations of organizers, and the risks and rights of athletes.
Bahagi na ng buhay nating mga Pilipino ang sports. Mula sa panahon ng unos, sa tamis ng tagumpay, sa kabila ng pagbabago ng buhay, ang Philippine Sports Commission ay patuloy na magiging lingkod sa sambayanan at atletang Pilipino.